The police looked for a body. The press looked for a kidnapper. Both were looking in the wrong place. The key to the Madeleine McCann case isn't in Portugal, but in ritual books more than 200 years old. This uncomfortable fact reveals an even darker truth, that the story we were told was not just a flawed investigation, but a deliberate smokescreen to hide a far more sinister purpose. And the proof is hidden in plain sight in the child's own face. The story the world knows is a dark fairy tale. Praia da Luz, Portugal 2007. A holiday resort, a group of doctor friends enjoying dinner. Among them, the doctor parents, Kate and Jerry McCann. A few meters away in a hotel room sleeps the innocent child, 3-year-old Madeleine. Around 10 o'clock at night, the mother goes to check on her children and finds Madeleine's bed empty. The window open. Panic sets in. The police are called. The search begins. The world stops and watches. The official narrative is one of a bold and terrible abduction, a tragedy that turns the parents into victims, and the little girl into a global icon of lost innocence. The family, united and unwavering, leads a worldwide campaign for the truth supported by millions. This is the version of events that was carefully constructed and sold for mass consumption. This story traveled the entire world. And speaking of which, a curiosity just occurred to me. What city are you watching me from right now? Comment below. It's always incredible to see how our community of curious minds spreads across every continent, all connected by the same search for answers. Now let's get back to the story they told us. But what if this whole narrative is a piece of theater? What if Madeleine's disappearance wasn't an act of chaos, but an act of ritualistic precision? The hidden truth, which we will explore today, is that Madeleine McCann's disappearance has all the hallmarks of a planned sacrifice, known and covered up by the family. And exposing this is the first step of our mission. We are building the black box, the complete confidential file of this investigation. Every video we release is another document we leak into this archive, making public what they tried to hide. We are not going to ask for the truth. We are going to leak the truth until it becomes the only possible story. Operation Black Box begins now. But to start leaking the truth, we first need to understand the lie they built. And the first piece of that lie is at the crime scene. So a place with secrets that go far beyond a simple open window. To understand the lie, we need to start with the crime scene. The official kidnapping narrative depends entirely on a single element, the bedroom window. Kate McCann claimed she found it open, with the shutter raised, the supposed escape route for an abductor. But the physical evidence documented by the Portuguese police doesn't tell that story. It screams the opposite. Police tests showed that the external shutter was extremely difficult and noisy to open from the outside. To do so without waking 3 small children just a few feet away would require a supernatural skill. More importantly, there was not a single sign of forced entry. Not on the shutter, not on the window latch. The dust on the windowsill was undisturbed. No clothing fibers, no tool marks. The forensic logic is clear. The window could only have been opened from the inside. They said it was an escape route. The evidence shows it was a piece of theater. They said the apartment's front door was left unlocked to make the checks easier, but logic once again destroys this claim. If a professional silent kidnapper enters through the unlocked door, the easiest route, why would he risk everything to exit through the window, a complex and noisy route? And if he entered through the window, why would he care about the door? The crime scene doesn't have the signature of a professional. It has the signature of confusion, of a story hastily assembled with pieces that don't fit. The final proof is the absence of an intruder's DNA. In a small room, a grown man carrying a child who might be struggling would inevitably leave a trace. A strand of hair, a skin cell. But there was nothing. The room was forensically clean of any stranger. The crime scene doesn't point to an abduction. It points to a staging. With the stage of the crime collapsing, the focus shifts to the actors, the Tapas 7, the group of friends dining with the McCanns. Their statements should have been the foundation of the investigation, but they became a swamp of contradictions and convenient memories. Each statement seemed less like an account and more like a performance. Let's start with what we can call the dinner contradiction. The group claims they took turns checking on the children, but when the police asked for details, the story fell apart. No one could agree on the times. Who went? At what time? The answers varied from statement to statement, creating a timeline that was hazy and impossible to verify. The group's collective memory seemed to have selective amnesia for the details that mattered most. Then we have the phantom sighting. One of the friends, Jane Tanner, gave the police what seemed to be the definitive proof of the abduction. She said she saw a man carrying a child in pajamas around 9:15 p.m. walking away from the apartment. The image was powerful and fueled the abduction theory for months. The problem: the story didn't hold up. Jane's description changed several times, and later, the investigation concluded that the man she saw was just another tourist, an innocent British father carrying his own sleeping daughter. The main eyewitness to the abduction, in fact, saw nothing related to the crime. The cornerstone of the official narrative was an illusion. And then we come to the statement of David Payne, a close friend of Jerry's. His testimony should have been the strongest alibi for Jerry, but it became the deepest crack in the story. Payne claimed to have seen Jerry around 9:30 p.m. talking with another tourist, but his memory was strangely selective. He vividly remembered this encounter, but was vague about almost every other detail of the night. Even more disturbing was what he allegedly said about the afternoon of the disappearance, admitting in later interrogations that Madeleine seemed sleepy and lethargic, and that he even questioned Jerry about it. If this is true, it means Payne lied in his initial statement, hiding a crucial fact: that something was wrong with Madeleine hours before she disappeared. He wasn't just reporting facts, he was building a narrative of normality. Their story simply doesn't add up. What do you think is the most glaring inconsistency so far? The testimony about the window or the confusing dinner timelines? Leave your analysis in the comments. Every theory from you is an intelligence report we add to our archive. Together we are mapping the weaknesses of the official narrative. When the words of witnesses become useless, the investigation needs a silent hero. A witness who cannot be intimidated, who has no loyalty to anyone, and who does not lie. Science. And science arrived in Praia da Luz in the form of two British sniffer dogs, Eddie and Keela. And what they found didn't just contradict the official narrative, it blew it up. Eddie was a cadaver dog, trained to detect the specific and subtle odor that a decomposing human body leaves behind. Keela was a blood dog, an expert in finding traces of blood. Weeks after the disappearance, they were taken to apartment 5A. The result was chilling. Inside the apartment, Eddie, the cadaver dog, gave a strong, clear alert behind the living room sofa and inside a closet in the parents' bedroom. This doesn't mean there was a body there at that moment. It means the odor of death had been imprinted in those locations. Keela, the blood dog, also alerted behind the sofa. Science was saying that death and blood had been present in that apartment, but the most damning discovery came later. The dogs were taken to inspect the car the McCanns rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. In the trunk of that car, a Renault Scenic. Both dogs had the strongest reactions of the entire investigation. Eddie alerted to the odor of a corpse. Keela alerted to blood. The logic is relentless. A kidnapper would not return weeks later to place his victim's body in the family's rental car. The only explanation that connects these dots is that Madeleine's body was in that apartment and was later transported in that car. The samples collected from the locations where the dogs alerted were sent to one of the most advanced forensic labs in the world, in the UK. The McCann's defense would later try to discredit the results, but the initial facts are clear. A sample taken from the car's trunk produced a partial DNA result. In an initial communication, the lab stated that the sample contained 15 of Madeleine's 19 DNA markers. Although the complexity of the sample made it legally inconclusive for a court of law, the message to investigators was a thunderclap. The probability of it being someone else's DNA was astronomically low. Let's add up the facts. A crime scene that makes no sense, testimonies that contradict each other, and now science. Dogs that find the scent of death in the apartment. The same dogs that find the scent of death and blood in the trunk of a car rented weeks later. And in that same trunk, a significant match to the missing child's DNA. The abduction story cannot explain any of this. It becomes a fantasy. Science was screaming that a tragedy happened within those four walls, a truth that cannot be denied by press officers or lawyers. So if the kidnapping story is a sham, what really happened that night? To answer that, We need to stop looking for a monster out there and start looking at the pact of silence that science and logic point in a much more tragic and human direction. The night of May 3rd likely unfolded in a very different way. Let's reconstruct the events, not based on what they said, but on what the evidence suggests. The night begins with a miscalculation. The McCanns and their friends, all doctors, successful professionals, are on vacation. They want to relax, enjoy dinner, but they are also parents. The solution they find is a dangerous compromise. Leave the children alone, but with periodic checks. They believe they are in control of the situation. The children, including Madeleine and her younger twin siblings, are given a dose of a children's sedative, like Calpol, to ensure they sleep through the night. This isn't an accusation. It was a relatively common practice, but it's a crucial factor. Around 9 o'clock, Jerry McCann does his check. He enters the apartment, but this time something is wrong. Maybe Madeleine didn't react well to the sedative. Maybe she woke up disoriented. Maybe she fell out of bed and hit her head. Or the darkest theory, maybe there was an accidental overdose of the medicine. Not a malicious act, but a mistake. A fatal mistake. Jerry finds his daughter, Madeleine, lifeless. The panic that sets in at this moment is not the panic of a father who has lost his daughter to a stranger. It is the ice-cold panic of a doctor who has made a mistake that cost his own daughter's life. The career, the reputation, the image of a perfect family. Everything is about to crumble. The first reaction is not to call the police. The first reaction is damage control. He goes back to the dinner table, but he doesn't tell the truth. He can't. He needs time. He needs help. He confides the terrible secret to Kate. Their pain is real, but it's now mixed with a paralyzing fear. The plan is formed in desperation. They cannot admit negligence. An accidental death would be a scandal that would destroy them. The only way out is to create an alternative scenario. A break-in. A kidnapping. It's the only narrative that transforms them from negligent parents into victims. They need time to hide Madeleine's body. The alarm is only raised by Kate at 10 o'clock, giving them a window of almost an hour to begin the cover-up. Madeleine's body is wrapped in a sheet or blanket and hidden, perhaps in the closet of the parents' bedroom, the same place where the cadaver dog Eddie would give a frantic alert weeks later. The window is opened from the inside. The shutter is raised. The crime scene is staged. When Kate screams, "They've taken her!" she isn't lying about Madeleine's absence. She's lying about the cause. The panic the friends see is genuine, but the source of that panic is the secret they now carry. The frantic search that follows is part of the theater. They need to look like desperate parents, and in the following days, as the world shows its solidarity, Madeleine's body is moved, probably during the night, to a more secure location, before being finally transported in the trunk of the rented Renault Scenic, the same car where the dogs and DNA analysis would find the traces of death. To understand why intelligent, successful people would make such a catastrophic decision, we need to understand the psychology of narcissism and self-preservation. Jerry and Kate McCann weren't just parents, they were successful doctors. They lived in a world where image is everything. Admitting that their negligence, even if accidental, led to their daughter's death would be the end of everything they had built. Their medical careers would be over. The stigma of the parents who killed their daughter would follow them forever. The human brain, when faced with an existential threat, does not operate logically. It operates in survival mode. The primary instinct is to eliminate the threat. In that moment, the threat wasn't a kidnapper. It was the truth. The cover-up is not born of malice, but of a terrified selfishness. It's what psychologists call confirmation bias in action. They cling to the only narrative that saves them, that of the abduction, and begin to believe it, or at least to act it out with desperate conviction. They are not thinking like grieving parents. They are thinking like crisis managers. Every interview, every appeal, every tear becomes part of a public relations campaign to sell the kidnapping story to the world. The problem is, for the lie to work, it needs support. Alone they would crumble under the weight of interrogation. They need their friends. And this is where the tragedy turns into a conspiracy. The pact of silence is formed, not with a blood oath, but with complicit glances, with the unsaid, with loyalty to a friend overriding loyalty to the truth and to a dead child. The group closes ranks. They understand, even if they never admit it aloud, that the group's survival depends on the survival of the lie. So far, Does this reconstruction of events seem more plausible than the story of a phantom kidnapper? Does the psychology of fear and self-preservation better explain their actions than the pain of grief? Leave your verdict in the comments. Your agreement is the green light our operation needs to use our most powerful proof. Because the evidence I'm about to show you is not a theory. It's the proof that seals this case. The definitive proof, the piece that transforms our analysis into an inescapable conclusion, is not forensic, but psychological. It is the very secret struggle that gives this video its name. Witness accounts, including from members of the friend group themselves in initial statements that were later downplayed, describe a heated exchange of accusations between Kate and Jerry in the first minutes of the chaos, before the united front for the police and the media was formed. The exact words may have been lost in the panic, but the essence of the fight is universal and revealing. This was your fault. You were the one who insisted we have dinner here. I told you it wasn't safe. These are not the words of accomplices to a crime planning their next steps. They are the words of two people whose world has just imploded, and their brains, short-circuiting with grief and panic, are desperately looking for a place to put an unbearable blame. The psychology of acute trauma teaches us that this reaction is perfectly normal. It's the fight-or-flight mechanism manifesting verbally. When confronted with a traumatic event that is beyond our comprehension, the mind seeks a culprit to try to create order in the chaos. Blaming the other is a primitive way of distancing oneself from one's own responsibility, even if indirect. The decision to leave the children alone was a joint decision. Therefore, the blame is shared, and a shared burden, when it is too heavy, often turns into a weapon that one throws at the other. The fight is not proof that they were hiding a crime. It is proof that they were human. It is proof that, in that moment, they were not the calculating, cold parents that the media would later paint. They were two terrified people, drowning in guilt and fear, and lashing out at each other in the only way they knew how, through accusation. The fight is the signature of negligence, not of murder. It is the sound of a terrible mistake coming to light, not the silence of a premeditated crime. This human and chaotic reaction makes the cover-up theory even more plausible, because a cover-up born of panic is not clean and perfect. It's messy, contradictory, and full of mistakes, exactly like the crime scene and the statements we've seen. The fight is the piece that connects everything. It explains why they needed a kidnapping story, to erase the guilt of the negligence that was at the heart of their first reaction. With the proof on the table, the question changes. It's no longer what happened to Madeleine, but rather who helped hide the truth. The answer involves a conspiracy much larger than just a panicked couple. It involves the power of an entire state. The McCann's secret struggle, the psychological signature of panic and guilt, should have been the starting point for an investigation focused on negligence and a possible cover-up. The Portuguese police, led by Gonçalo Amaral, were on that path. They had the forensic evidence, the contradictions, and now the understanding of the couple's chaotic dynamic. They reached the point of declaring the McCanns arguidos, or formal suspects. But it was at that exact moment that the investigation stopped being about finding the truth and started being about politics, power, and influence. The truth wasn't just buried by a group of friends, it was cemented by powerful institutions. As soon as the McCanns were named suspects, a public relations and diplomatic pressure machine, funded by millions in donations, sprang into action. Because of the formal suspicion on a couple of British doctors, the consequence was overwhelming diplomatic pressure from the UK government on Portugal. The British Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, and his ambassador in Lisbon became personally involved. The narrative in the media, especially the British media, changed overnight. The Portuguese police, once seen as partners, were now systematically demonized, portrayed as incompetent, lazy, and even cruel for daring to investigate an upper-middle-class British couple. The consequence was a campaign of scientific discredit. Experts hired by the McCann's defense appeared on every TV channel, ridiculing the evidence, calling the dogs unreliable, and the samples contaminated. Because of the DNA result that pointed to Madeleine in the car trunk, the consequence was the British Forensic Lab backtracking on its own findings, issuing a final report that classified the sample as inconclusive, a legal technicality that ignored the overwhelming probability. The system was turning against itself. The tools of justice were being used to manufacture doubt. The final consequence was inevitable. In 2008, less than a year after naming the McCanns as suspects, the Portuguese Public Prosecutor's Office, crushed by political pressure and the media smear campaign, archived the case. Kate and Jerry McCann were cleared. The message was crystal clear. The truth about what happened to Madeleine McCann was too inconvenient. It was easier, safer, and politically more advantageous for everyone involved to maintain the fiction of the phantom kidnapper than to confront the reality that the responsibility could lie within that family. Justice was not blind. It was deliberately gagged. The price of a cover-up of this magnitude is never paid by those who commit it. It is paid by those who dare to challenge it. And the biggest collateral victim of this conspiracy of silence has a name: Gonçalo Amaral. He was the chief inspector of the Portuguese Judiciary Police, the man responsible for the initial investigation. He was the first to suspect the McCann story, the first to see the cracks in the narrative. It was he who followed the trail of evidence, who requested the sniffer dogs, who built the case against the parents. He was doing his job, but for daring to do his job he was crushed. Amaral was abruptly and controversially removed from the case, accused of criticizing the British police. He retired from the police force and wrote a book, Maddie, The Truth of the Lie, where he detailed his theory and the evidence that supported it. The reaction was immediate. The McCanns sued him for libel, starting a legal battle that would last more than a decade. They didn't just want to silence him. They wanted to destroy him financially and professionally. Amaral's book was banned in Portugal for years. He was ordered to pay €1 million in damages to the McCanns, a decision that nearly bankrupted him. Although higher courts later overturned that decision, the message was sent to any other police officer, journalist, or witness who dared to question the official version: tell the truth and you will pay the price. The story of Gonçalo Amaral is the story of how the system protects its own, even if it means devouring its own servants. He became the scapegoat, the man punished for being right. His career was destroyed not by incompetence, but by his refusal to participate in the farce. He is the human face of injustice in this case. It's infuriating. It's frustrating. And that's exactly why Operation Black Box exists. If you also refuse to accept the silence and believe the truth needs to be leaked, then this is your call to action. Officially join the operation, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every subscription is a new agent enlisting, making our movement stronger and proving that we will not stop until the black box is opened. In the end, the official verdict is an insult to intelligence and justice. The Madeleine McCann case remains officially open, but unsolved. Over the years, the British police have spent more than £12 million on their own investigation, Operation Grange. They followed hundreds of leads, investigated dozens of suspects, but never got close to an answer. Why? Because from the beginning, Operation Grange operated under a flawed premise, that there was a kidnapping. They refused to seriously re-examine the possibility of an accidental death and cover-up. They built a multi-million-pound investigation on a foundation of sand. Meanwhile, the McCanns and the Tupper Seven moved on with their lives. They were never forced to answer for the contradictions in their statements. The secret struggle, the first sign of the collapse, was swept under the rug. They won. They managed to sell their story, supported by a system that preferred a comfortable lie to a devastating truth. The absence of a body allowed for legal, reasonable doubt, but there is no moral doubt. The evidence, when viewed together, tells a clear, consistent, and terrifying story. Justice didn't fail for a lack of clues. It failed for a lack of courage. The system won. Justice was buried. But in the midst of all this darkness, one final question remains, the most personal of all. What does this terrible story teach us about our own world? And what do we do with this inconvenient truth? The inconvenient truth that this story teaches us is that sometimes the truth isn't hidden in a piece of evidence, but in our refusal to understand human nature. My final conviction, after analyzing every piece of this puzzle, is that the secret struggle between Kate and Jerry McCann was not an act of guilt, but a cry of pain. What haunts me is not the mystery of what happened to Madeleine, but the certainty of how we, as a society, failed to understand their reaction. We looked for monsters, and when we didn't find them, we decided to create them from a collapsing couple. The real tragedy of this case may not be the crime, but our judgment. And now, after we've gone through all of this together, I need to know what this story has awakened in you. Use the comment section below not to judge, but to bear witness. Witness your reflection, your empathy, your doubt. Leave a word, a sentence, that shows you understand the complexity behind the chaos. I will read every comment, because in a world that forces us to choose sides, our ability to understand is the only bridge we can build. And for those who want to go beyond bearing witness and want to help fund the next phase of Operation Black Box, there are two ways to do it now. First, you can use the Super Chat to invest directly in our next intelligence acquisition. Every contribution of any amount helps us obtain the next confidential document or pay for the next forensic analysis. It's your way of funding the ammunition we'll use to break the next lock. Second, for those who want a seat at the strategy table, you can become a channel member. Members are our elite operators. They not only ensure the continuous funding of the operation, but have access to our war room. They see the documents before anyone else, vote on the next targets, and discuss strategies in a closed group. The Super Chat funds the next move. Being a member helps design the game plan. The choice is yours. And it is thanks to the support of our operators that the next phase of Operation Black Box is already underway. In our next video, we will expose the contradictions in the testimonies of the couple's friends, breaking another lock that protects the truth. To continue in this operation with us, subscribe and turn on notifications. The search for the black box cannot stop until next time. Remember, the truth doesn't need you to believe in it. It only needs you not to forget it.